Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, the program coming to you live on CGTN. It is the dawn of the cashless age, they say. It's the digital money that makes the world go around through mobile payments, fintech with virtual banks, and, of course, cryptocurrency. Last month, social network giant Facebook jumped on the bandwagon, unveiling a new cryptocurrency called the Libra. It's powered by a technology called blockchain, of course, but unlike the popular Bitcoin, users cannot create Libras. They can only buy it. Libra is backed by assets, so its price shouldn't fluctuate dramatically, many believe, like Bitcoin's roller coaster performance. Facebook hopes this new product will help especially those some 1.5 billion people, adults in the world, who have no access to a traditional bank. But Facebook's ambitious venture is met with more questions than excitement. On Wednesday, Chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, said Libra raises many serious concerns regarding privacy, money laundering, consumer protection, and financial stability. These concerns are shared by many governments around the world. Cryptocurrency, digital finance. We are joined by a strong panel in London. Patrick McCrory, assistant professor from King's College in London, the UK's first PhD graduate in cryptocurrencies. Good to see you. In New York, we invite Max Wolf, a professor of economics from the New School University in Beijing. Last but not least, Andy Mock, senior research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Welcome to the three of you, gentlemen. Exciting, but certainly a lot of news going back and forth about the fate of cryptocurrency, particularly Libra. What do you say, Professor Wolf, the current stage?
So we've seen an increasingly intense sort of ebb and flow of an experiment with the cryptocurrencies, and I think probably the legacy name currency doesn't really belong terribly well to the group. I think we sort of have two different things. We have a wild speculative frenzy and a series of increasingly successful and then heartbreakingly unsuccessful get-rich-quick schemes, behind which we have a real innovation in technology that will probably eventually have a pretty large effect on how value is stored and moved around. That's the blockchain. So the currencies are usually an attempt to basically self-enrich or trap people in a walled garden. Facebook's looks like a possible new business area to open up for them that would get people to sort of pre-commit to a Facebook ecosystem of spending, which would be nothing other than a huge advantage for Facebook. Still remains to be seen how it helps anyone else, but interesting experiment at a large scale.
It is a lot of layers, isn't it, Mr. McCrory? I mean, for someone who's a major in cryptocurrency, you must know about this. This is a business level of discussion. There's also a so-called security level, particularly financial security, global financial security level of discussion. Of course, there's also the issue of how governments work with businesses as well. So your take?
Well, what was the take on? Sorry.
The question is, what about the three layers of discussion? Which you think is more important?
The layer of discussion in terms of business and money are governments.
Business, government relations. What about the global financial security situation? And what about what one business can do and its relation with the other business? You get it?
Yeah, I got you. Yes.
Great.
So if this is in terms of Libra. Yeah.
Yes, sure.
So
that's the topic of today.
Yeah,
if you know what you're being invited to, sir.
yeah. So I think for Libra, I think what you're basically discovering is that there's 100 founding members in the world, these Western companies, that are basically trying to set up a new global currency reserve. And it's actually it's a little bit terrifying that the fact there's going to be 100 currencies or 100 founding members who are going to be able to dictate monetary policy and take that away from national governments. Yeah, so I'm very dubious whether Libra will ever ship or be deployed.
Interesting.
So you noticed last week with the Federal Reserve in the U.S., they basically told Libra the stop implementation. just so the national governments can actually assess the situation.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Mok in Beijing?
I do. I mean, I think the key, if we're looking at it from a government perspective, is Fed Chairman Jerome Powell's phrasing that this is a marathon, not a sprint. For businesses, especially technology businesses that depend on speed of implementation, I think this is the kiss of death. And why has this happened? I think this is a misstep by Facebook in that certainly targeting 1.5 billion people who are unbanked is a good commercial business opportunity. But I think they're touching the third rail of global finance in that any country, I think, considers control of its currency, if nothing else for monetary policy to manage the economy, is crucial. And any entity, company or otherwise, that would seek to undermine that power, I think really is going to hit a brick wall.
Well, Professor Mok, Professor Wolf, there was the case that governments around the world are controlling the kinds of currency being used in their own countries at least, and also globally there's a basket of currencies that's likely to be most important, US dollar at the very center of it. Now, the question really is Libra, when used, and particularly getting popular all over the world, would it mean an advantage for a company like Facebook, or an advantage also for a government such as the United States, even in the field of cryptocurrency?
So those are interesting questions. It's hard to sort of answer because we haven't seen a deployment. But look, we have had experiments with private currencies. They dominated the world financial system until roughly the early part of the 20th century, until about the turn of the last century, right? And so we experimented with various private money issuance without this technology for about 600 years, and it was mostly an unmitigated and complete and total failure because you needed a last instance guarantor. The state did that, and you needed an international set of rules, and those were variously produced by state and interstate agreements. So it's not so clear that pure greed will self-generate a regulatory system that's robust, even with the new technology. And we do have to be honest with ourselves that it was not an unbridled success under the gold standard or even the best of the pre-existing arrangements. So it's also just not theoretically possible that we'd get an international currency that there aren't national rule makings and findings on, because even if the state serves no other purpose, they still have the legal right to arrest you and put you in prison, which is pretty compelling for most real human beings making decisions.
That's making this especially interesting, isn't it, Patrick? If Facebook
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, sure. You could add something to that, but I also have a question to follow up if you can. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So my question really is, the legal framework Professor Wolf was talking about, extremely interesting because Facebook based in the United States, which means Facebook as a company has to abide by the American law. However, Facebook is doing a cryptocurrency that's supposed to be used worldwide, and therefore, which means indirectly the American rule of law and American government is controlling the fate of cryptocurrency, such as Libra, if it is being used worldwide. Do you take that, Patrick?
Yeah, so I think Facebook have actually played a very nice trick here to avoid, the U.S. government being able to stamp on it and pull it out. So Libra is actually an association or foundation in Switzerland. So it's actually being run from Switzerland in the moment and not the U.S. What the Facebook have also done is they remove liability of themselves. So when they say that when this currency launches, one point is to say in the U.S., it's free speech to write code. You can write as much code as you want, and you cannot be held liable for that. But what they've done is that they're writing the code, and when you go to put the code live and deploy it, there's going to be 100 companies that are going to run the system. So all 100 companies distributed across the world are sharing the liability for this.
But
so
the 100 companies, even though as big as 100, one could argue there's always a major player among those 100, first of all. And secondly, if you look at the 100 companies vis-a-vis millions and probably billion companies around the world, it's still a very small group of companies. And therefore, also the trust issue, why should we trust these 100 companies? Just like the question, why should we trust governments as well? Patrick, if you could go ahead with some brief answers.
Yeah. So I think what's really important there to highlight is that what these corporations are pretty much doing are trying to go above nation states and governments. So what's going to happen in the future is that when so the way Libra gets its value is that there's a bucket of currencies that they've not yet decided what's going to be in there. What's going to be really remarkable is that these corporations are going to get to decide which currencies get in the basket.
Yeah.
And how significant those currencies are on a global stage. And that's a huge financial power these like 100+ founding members are going to have. I think one other point they make is that while there's going to be a major player to begin with, which is Facebook, which is pushing forward this initiative, the way the foundation is set up is that it's going to be a supermajority of these members. So you may have to get 70% of these founding members vote before a policy can be changed. So they've got some safeguards there to prevent one major player taking advantage of it.
Interesting. Andy, your take?
Well, I think that, again, I think I'm fairly skeptical about this. I think the point's made that, of course, Facebook as a corporation headquartered in the U.S. is subject to some degree to U.S. law. But also, I think Patrick's point is a good one in that these global corporations, in some sense, are able to transcend national laws. And that's one of the challenges of our times as well, especially with data, with technology that affects billions of customers around the world.
But we also see that companies around the world, no matter how global they are very vulnerable to global trade wars, as we see every day in the headlines. So if you argue global companies could be free from all the troubles created by politics or geopolitics, it's probably too naive, is it?
Sure. Well, I say not free from the constraints of politics or geopolitics, but they do have some degree of flexibility so that if the legal regime, the regulatory regime is too onerous in the U.S., they can shift some degree out to other parts of the world. But of course, they can't completely avoid that. Yes,
right, and on the other
true.
hand, the basket of currencies, likely cryptocurrency today, likely to be issued by anybody, is still very much likely to have the U.S. dollar as the major currency in that basket, and therefore making U.S. dollar has a great advantage, and therefore any country that is having a U.S. dollar, mainly printing by the United States, also have a huge advantage as a result. So Professor Wolf, given all of those principles and likely happening phenomena explained, what do you make of the future of cryptocurrency? Once again, I want to bring out these three layers that we discussed earlier among businesses, between business and government, and also in terms of the bigger framework of security of global currencies.
So my guess is that one of two things happens. Either we see the major currencies with some possible private add-ons and purely speculative add-ons, but we see the major currencies become the crypto dollar, the crypto renminbi, and to some degree, crypto Swiss franc, what have you. Or, right, in other words, we see a sort of mashup of the more kind of techtopian vision that's been associated with crypto with the realities of the modern banking and payment system. Either that, or we see a period of relatively chaotic cryptocurrency usage in countries that have a national currency that is a burden and a fetter on their development. But and there sort of be two tiers here, and we see the dominant countries with hard currencies, or let's call them economically viable currencies, stay the course, and crypto becomes an interesting payment and database technology, which is what it is, and not so much a replacement for currencies, because what modern currencies are, they're largely digitized anyway,
right,
and they are the product of a series of rules from central governments, and I don't see that changing in the foreseeable future.
Now, we take a look at the overall situation. Okay, so Libra has been cautioned by the U.S. Governments, different branches of the governments. And also, we also know G7 is likely to do a report, likely in the middle of this month, about cryptocurrency and its impact and how governments should deal with that. Certainly, we know the IMF, particularly the managing director of IMF, have been talking repeatedly about the caution people should have toward cryptocurrency. So it seems that whether it's individual governments or international organizations or platforms are all taking different ways of looking at the fate of cryptocurrency. So given that as a reality, Patrick. Where are we heading for in the near? Let's take a look at this very important near future. Patrick, go ahead.
In the near future, so I think there's one important point to mention is that Bitcoin's 10 years old now, and Bitcoin's actually is the only online digital money that's been basically online for 100% of the time, and is, you know, open source, permissionless, anyone can access and anyone can use it. So given this 10-year history of proven success, I don't think it's going to go anywhere anytime soon. I think what we're going to see in the near future are central banks and national governments issuing their own type of cryptocurrency. So there's already some governments or central banks, I think the Chinese central bank recently mentioned they're going to step up their efforts towards issuing their own coin. I think what you're going to see is a lot of countries issuing their own coins. You'll have Libra in the middle. That will hopefully be this regulated global reserve. I don't think it's actually ever going to ship. I'd be very dubious whether regulators ever let that ship.
Okay.
And then I think what you're going to have is something like Bitcoin or Ethereum. That's like, you know, global programmable money. That'll be like this new trust-free financial system.
I see.
That would be my vision.
Oh, okay. There we go. You are the first PhD. What can I say, right? Andy, go ahead. Your thoughts. Near future.
Well, I think in the near future, China is doing some very interesting things. And I want to make the distinction here between cryptocurrency and digital currency or digital money. So I think one of the things that's very interesting that we can see in the near term is China's exploring, looking at replacing cash, so the physical money, the bills and the coins, with some sort of digital substitute. And that solves a lot of problems. It still preserves some anonymity for users, but it also gives the government a lot more transparency, better, more complete, more granular data on the economy. So I think that's one important thing that we can look for, and I would distinguish that from a cryptocurrency, but I would call that perhaps digital currency.
I see. Last but not least, Max, what do you think? Near future.
Yes, so I think we need to see a retrenchment of the notion of blockchain as currency and speculative investment vehicle, and a change for the use technology, which I think would open up some greater possibilities. But I think that a lot of the excitement around cryptocurrency has been driven by fantastic and irreproducible investment gains, which are really a testament to this era of upward wealth redistribution and loose monetary policy. And so we'll have to see that normalized before we can make an assessment outside of an unusual benchmarking situation.
I see. Good point there. All of you, great points. Certainly we learned a lot about cryptocurrency and its relations with our financial security for the future. Thank you so much, Andy Mok, Max Wolf, and Patrick McCrory. Really appreciate it, gentlemen.